What if a boy's single act of kindness could unravel the secrets of a frozen prairie? In the harsh Wyoming winter of 1879, where the wind carries whispers of loss, a young settler named Caleb Morrow heard a cry no one else dared to. This is the tale of a stranger's fragile breath and a boy's courage to defy the cold. Brace yourself. This story of heart and mystery will hold you tight and won't let go. The Wyoming prairie stretched wide and silent, its frost glittering like broken glass under a dawn that refused to warm. The sky hung heavy, a slab of gray pressing down on the endless grass, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Caleb Morrow, just 15, thin as a willow switch and quieter than the shadows, stepped off the creaking porch of his family's homestead. His coat hung open, his scarf forgotten on a peg inside, but his arms cradled a quilt hand-stitched by his late aunt. Its patches of red and gold faded from years of sun and sorrow. He hadn't told his ma or pa where he was going. They were too busy. His pay sharpening tools by the fire. His ma lost in her prayers for a milder winter. Caleb's boots crunched through the frost, each step deliberate, as if drawn by a sound he couldn't name. Last night, under the howl of the wind, he'd heard something, a faint cry, too soft for a wolf, too human for the storm. It had lingered in his dreams, sharp and restless, pulling him out here before the sun could rise. The barn stood at the edge of their land, its weathered planks sagging under the weight of time. The air smelled of frozen hay, damp wood, and the faint iron tank of blood from last month's butchering. Crows perched on the fence, their black eyes glinting, watching him like they knew something he didn't. Caleb's breath puffed out in quick, white clouds, vanishing as fast as it formed. He rounded the barn, slow, his heart thudding against his ribs. There, in a shallow hollow where the fence met the frozen earth, lay a woman, half-curled like a leaf caught in frost. Her buckskin dress, once adorned with intricate beadwork, was soaked through, torn at the shoulder, clinging to her trembling frame. Her bare feet were pale, cracked, blood seeping from cuts like ink on paper. A dark braid, matted with dirt and streaked with dried blood, spilled across her shoulder. Her hand clutched a small beaded pouch, its red and white patterns catching the faint light like a dying ember. Her chest rose so faintly it might have been a trick of the wind. Caleb froze, his breath catching. For a moment, he thought she was dead, a ghost left behind by the prairie's cruelty. Then her eyelids fluttered, revealing brown eyes deep as a winter river, clouded with pain but sharp with life. They locked onto his, holding a question that felt older than words, as if she'd forgotten what it meant to be seen. Her lips, cracked and scabbed, parted, but no sound came. Her fingers tightened on the pouch, clutching it like a prayer she couldn't speak. You alive?" Caleb whispered, his voice barely breaking the wind's low moan. She didn't answer, but her gaze held his, unfocused yet piercing, like she was searching for something she'd lost. Caleb glanced back at the house, its windows glowing with the soft warmth of lamplight. His PA was probably cursing the frost, his ma stirring oats for breakfast. No one would miss him, not for a few minutes. He knelt, the frost biting through his jeans, and unfolded the quilt. It smelled of cedar and his aunt's hands, its patches worn but heavy with memory. He draped it over her shoulders, careful not to touch the bruises. He saw purple welts on her wrists, half hidden by torn cloth. Someone had hurt her, tied her, left her to die. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Caleb said, his voice steadier now, though his hands shook. "You need help." Her eyes softened, not with trust but with a kind of surrender, as if she'd been fighting too long to resist kindness. The wind kicked up, swirling frost around them, and Caleb noticed a faint scar across her cheek, thin as a blade's edge. She wasn't old, maybe his ma's age, but her face was hollowed, carved by hunger and cold. He stood, his boots sinking into the snow, and backed toward the barn. "Stay here," he said, though he wasn't sure she understood. "I'll get something." Inside the barn, the air was thick with the scent of horses and dust. Caleb grabbed a tin flask of water from a shelf, a clean rag, and a crust of cornbread he'd stashed in his pocket yesterday. His mind raced. Who was she? A runaway? A survivor of something worse? That pouch, red and white beads glinting like stars. What did it hold? He stepped back into the cold. The quilt, now a vivid patch of color against the gray hollow. She was still there, her breath a faint mist, her eyes half open but alive. He knelt again, offering the flask. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, her grip weak but desperate. She drank slowly, water spilling down her chin, her eyes never leaving his. Caleb held out the cornbread, but she shook her head, her hand returning to the pouch. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice soft, like he was coaxing a frightened colt. She didn't speak, but her eyes flickered, as if the question stirred something deep. The wind howled, and Caleb caught a shadow on the ridge beyond the fence, flicker of movement, too quick to be sure. His pulse quickened. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. He looked back at her, her face pale but resolute, and knew he couldn't leave her to the cold or whatever lurked in the frost. Who was the woman clinging to? Life in the hollow, and what danger watches from the shadows of the ridge? The Wyoming dawn broke sharp and cold, the frost glittering like shattered stars across the prairie. Caleb Morrow slipped out of the house before his ma could call him for chores, his boots leaving faint prints in the snow. The quilt he'd draped over the stranger yesterday weighed on his mind, its patches of red and gold a beacon in his thoughts. He hadn't slept much, haunted by her hollowed face, her brown eyes that held both pain and something unspoken, like a story buried under frost. The barn loomed ahead, its sagging roof dusted white, the air thick with the scent of hay and the faint iron tank of last month's slaughter. Caleb's heart thudded, half expecting to find her gone. A ghost vanished with the night. He pushed open the barn door, its hinges groaning like a warning. There she was, in the hollow near the fence, curled under the quilt. Her breath rose in faint, steaming wisps, proof she was still alive. Her buckskin dress, torn and soaked, clung to her frame, and her dark braid, streaked with dirt, spilled across the ground. The beaded pouch, red and white, glinting like a promise, rested against her chest, her fingers still curled around it. Her eyes flickered open as Caleb approached, her gaze sharper now, less clouded, but still wary, like a deer caught in a trap. "You made it through the night," Caleb said, his voice low, barely breaking the barn's quiet. He knelt, setting down a tin flask of water and a small bundle of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. "Brought you something to eat." She didn't move at first, her eyes searching his face, as if testing whether his kindness had strings attached. Slowly, she reached for the flask, her hands trembling, the bruises on her wrists stark in the morning light. She drank, slow and deliberate, water trickling down her chin. The cornbread she took but didn't eat, holding it like it was too precious to break. Caleb watched, his throat tight. He'd never seen someone so broken yet so fierce, like a flame refusing to die. "What's your name?" he asked again, softer this time, sitting back on his heels. "I'm Caleb. Caleb Morrow." Her lips parted, cracked and scabbed, and her voice came, faint, as a whisper on the wind. "Tala," she said, the word rough but clear, like a stone, smoothed by a river. "Means wolf." Caleb nodded, the name fitting her somehow wild, solitary, but not without strength. "Tala," he repeated, testing it. "You got folks looking for you." Her eyes darkened, not with fear but with something heavier, grief, maybe, or secrets, too deep to share. She shook her head, her fingers tightening on the pouch. "No one," she whispered, her voice breaking like thin ice. "Not anymore." Caleb's chest ached. He thought of his ma, her hands worn from years of work, and his PA, gruff but steady. They weren't perfect, but they were his. Tala had nothing, or so she said. He stood, brushing frost from his jeans. "You can't stay out here, it's too cold." He pointed to the barn's back stall, where straw was piled high. "I'll make you a place inside. Ain't much, but it's warm." She didn't protest, but her eyes followed him as he moved, wary yet grateful. Caleb worked quickly, piling straw into a makeshift bed, draping an old horse blanket over it, for extra warmth. He helped her stand, her body light as a bird, her steps unsteady but determined. She leaned on him, just enough to make it to the stall, where she sank into the straw, pulling the quilt tight. The pouch never left her hand. "Why you doing this?" she asked, her voice stronger now, though still rough. "You don't know me." Caleb paused, his hands still on the blanket. He thought of his aunt, who'd sewn the quilt with love, before fever took her. "You look like you needed seeing," he said simply. "My aunt, she'd done the same." Tala's eyes softened, a flicker of something new, trust, maybe, or the memory of kindness long forgotten. She reached into the pouch, her fingers trembling, and pulled out a small wooden charm, carved into the shape of a wolf's head, its lines worn smooth. "This was my brother's," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's gone now." Caleb took the charm, its weight light, but heavy with meaning. "What happened to him?" he asked, his voice gentle, like he was afraid to break her story. She looked away. her eyes tracing the barn's slatted walls, where dust danced in the slivers of dawn. Men with guns, she said, her words sharp as a blade. They took everything, our camp, our horses, him. Her hand closed over the pouch again, as if it held the last piece of her world. Caleb's stomach twisted. He'd heard stories, whispers of raids, of tribes pushed off their land, of settlers and soldiers clashing in the dark. His PA called it progress, but to Caleb, it sounded like theft. He handed the charm back, his fingers brushing hers. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. She didn't reply, but her gaze held his, steady and searching, as if she saw something in him she hadn't expected. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a faint sound, whooze, distant but deliberate, from the ridge beyond the fence. Caleb's pulse quickened. He moved to the barn door, peering through a crack. The ridge was empty, but the air felt wrong, heavy, with eyes he couldn't see. "Caleb," Tala whispered, her voice urgent now. "You gotta be careful. They might come for me." "Who?" he asked, turning back, his hand on the door. She shook her head, her eyes dark with secrets. "The ones who left me to die." Who hunts Tala in the shadows of the ridge? And will Caleb's kindness bring salvation or danger to his home? The Wyoming night wrapped the prairie in a velvet cloak, its stars sharp as knife points against a sky black as coal. Caleb Morrow lay awake in his attic room, the thin blanket doing little to warm the chill in his bones. His thoughts clung to Tala, the woman in the barn, her brown eyes like deep winter rivers, haunted yet fierce, and her whispered warning, "They might come for me," ringing like a bell in his mind. The house was still, his PA's snores rumbling through the floorboards, his ma's footsteps long silenced. But outside, the wind carried a new pulse, a faint thud of hooves, distant but deliberate, like a heartbeat stirring the dark. Caleb sat up, his heart pounding against his ribs. He slipped on his boots, the leather cold and stiff, and crept to the window, his breath fogging the warped glass. The prairie stretched silver under the moonlight, its frost glinting like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Beyond the barn, the ridge loomed, its crest jagged against the sky. Shadows moved their tall silent shapes, too many to count, their outlines blending into the night. Riders, perhaps, or something older, as if the land itself had summoned ghosts to watch the barn where Tala slipped. Caleb's chest tightened. He'd heard his POS stories of raiders, of blood spilled over land and pride, but this felt different, heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. He grabbed a lantern, its wick flickering low, and slipped out the back door, avoiding the porch's creak. The frost crunched under his boots, brittle as old bones, as he moved toward the barn. The air smelled of frozen earth, damp hay, and the faint musk of horses restless in their stalls. Inside, Tala sat upright in the back stall, the quilt draped over her shoulders like a shield. Her buckskin dress, torn and dry now, clung to her thin frame, and her dark braid, streaked with dirt, hung loose. The beaded pouch, red and white, glinting like a fading star, rested in her lap, her fingers tracing its patterns as if they held her story. Her brown eyes caught the lantern's glow, sharp and alert, no longer clouded by pain but burning with a quiet fire. "You heard him," Caleb whispered, setting the lantern on a beam. "Who's out there?" Tala's gaze flicked to the barn's slatted wall, as if she could pierce the wood and see the ridge beyond. "Men who don't forget," she said, her voice low, rough from her wounds, but steady as stone. "They think I took something they'd kill for." Caleb knelt in the straw, the cold seeping through his jeans. "Did you steal it?" he asked, his voice barely above a breath. She shook her head, her fingers tightening on the pouch until her knuckles paled. "Not the way they see it." She reached inside, pulling out the wooden wolf charm, its carved lines worn smooth, catching the lantern's faint light. "This was my brother's. He carved it before the fire can be, for they took our camp, our horses, our lives. I ran with this pouch. They think it holds their secrets, a map, maybe, or names. It don't. Just his wolf, and a lock of my ma's hair." Caleb's stomach churned. He'd heard whispers in town of tribes pushed west, of settlers and soldiers, carving up the land with blood and iron. His PA called it the way of the world. But to Caleb, it sounded like a wound that wouldn't heal. He took the charm when she offered it, its weight light but heavy with grief. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice soft, like he was afraid to break her. "Soldiers. Outlaws." Her eyes darkened, like storm clouds rolling over the plains. "Men who trade in blood, white, native, don't matter. They wanted our land, our stories. When I wouldn't give 'em up, they tied me, beat me, Left me in the snow to die. Her voice cracked, but her gaze held steady. I didn't die. That's why they're here. Caleb's breath caught. He glanced at the barn door, where a sliver of moonlight cut through a crack. The shadows on the ridge hadn't moved, but their presence pressed against him, heavy as a storm cloud. I can get my PA, he said, though the thought of his father's rifle made his heart lurch. He's got a gun. He'll run em off. No, Tala said, her voice sharp, her hand gripping his arm, cold but firm. They'll burn this place to ash before they leave empty-handed. You gotta keep me hidden. Caleb, for your ma, your PA, your home. He nodded, his throat dry as dust. He thought of his ma's gentle hands, worn from years of mending clothes, and his past gruff voice, softened only when he spoke of the land they'd claimed. This wasn't their fight, but Caleb had chosen it when he draped that quilt over Tala's trembling form. He stood, moving to the door, and peered through the crack. The ridge was still, but the air felt alive, charged with unseen eyes. A low hum drifted on the wind, not wind, but voices, chanting soft and distant, like a song from the bones of the earth. He turned back to Tala, her face pale but fierce, like a wolf cornered yet unbroken. I'll bring more food tomorrow, he said, his voice steady despite the fear curling in his gut, and a blanket thicker one. You stay here, out of sight. Tala's eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude breaking through her guarded stare. She slipped the wolf charm back into the pouch, her fingers lingering on the beads. You're risking too much, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Why? Caleb thought of his aunt, her quilt, her stories of strangers helped on lonely trails. My aunt used to say you don't turn away from someone hurting, he said, even if it scares you. He paused, then added, and you don't scare me, Tala. She didn't smile, but her gaze held his, steady and searching. As if she saw something in him she hadn't expected, a spark, maybe, or a mirror of her own resilience. Outside, a crow cawed, sharp and sudden, slicing through the night. Caleb's heart jumped. He dimmed the lantern, cloaking the barn in shadow, and moved to a corner where he could watch the door. Sleep, he said, his voice firm but kind. I'll stay till dawn. As Tala curled into the straw, the quilt pulled tight. The chanting grew louder, weaving through the wind like a thread through cloth. Caleb gripped the charm in his pocket, its edges pressing into his palm. The ridge was alive now, shadows shifting, horses snorting faintly. Tala's words echoed. They want to see if I'm still alive. But as Caleb watched the dark, he felt another truth take root. Whatever hunted her was hunting him now. To Dot, who were the shadows stalking the ridge? And will Caleb's courage shield Tala or draw danger to his family's door? The Wyoming dawn broke like a promise kept, its pale light spilling over the prairie, turning the frost to a sea of silver. Caleb Morrow hadn't slept, his eyes burning from a night spent watching the barn's shadowed walls. Tala's words, "They want to see if I'm still alive," hung heavy, like a stone in his chest. The distant hoofbeats from the ridge had faded before midnight, but the silence they left felt louder, as if the prairie itself was waiting. Caleb slipped out of the house, his boots crunching through the frost. A sack of dried apples and a wool blanket tucked under his arm. His ma was still asleep, his PA out checking traps, but the barn called to him, its weathered planks hiding a woman whose story was unraveling his world. Inside, Tala sat in the back stall, her buckskin dress patched with straw, the quilt draped over her shoulders like a cloak. Her dark braid, now untangled, framed a face still pale but fiercer, her brown eyes sharp as flint in the lantern's glow. The beaded pouch, red and white, glinting like a heartbeat, rested in her lap, her fingers tracing the wolf charm inside. She looked up as Caleb entered, her gaze steady but guarded, like a wolf scenting danger. "You're back," she said, her voice rough but stronger, each word a small victory over the cold. "Brought you something," Caleb said, kneeling to set down the apples and blanket. "Warmer than that quilt. You need it." He unfolded the wool, its deep gray flecked with burrs, and draped it over her. She didn't flinch, but her eyes followed his hands, as if kindness was a language she was still learning. "Why you keep doing this?" Tala asked, her voice low, almost a challenge. "Your folks, they'll find me. They won't like it." Caleb's throat tightened. He thought of his PA's rifle, always loaded, and his ma's prayers, whispered against the prairie's cruelty. "They don't need to know yet," he said, his voice firm but quiet. "You ain't hurting nobody. You're just trying to live." Tala's lips twitched, not a smile but something close, like a crack in a frozen river. She took an apple, biting into it slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You're braver than you look, Caleb Morrow," she said, her voice softening. "Or dumber." He grinned, a flush creeping up his neck. "Maybe both." He sat on a feed crate, the barn's air thick with the scent of hay and horses. "You said thereafter, them riders on the ridge, you know who they are." Her fingers stilled on the pouch, her gaze dropping to the straw. "They're led by a man called Voss," she said, her voice hardening. "A trader sells furs, guns, promises. He thinks I know where my brother hid something, a ledger, maybe, with names of men he dealt with, men who don't like their names written down." She touched the wolf charm, her fingers trembling. "My brother died protecting it. Voss thinks I got it. I don't." Caleb's heart sank. He'd heard of men like Voss in town traders, who'd sell their own kin for $1. Men who left blood in their wake. "Why not run?" he asked. "Far from here." Tala's eyes met his, fierce and raw. "I ran once, lost everything. Running again just means they win." Her voice broke, but she straightened, like a tree bending but not breaking in the wind. "I ain't giving him that." Caleb nodded, his hands clenching the crate's edge. He wanted to promise her safety, but what could a boy of 15 do against men who burned camps and broke lives? He stood, moving to the barn door, and peered through a crack. The ridge was empty now, the frost untouched, but the air felt wrong, heavy with unseen eyes. He turned back to Tala. "I'll keep them away," he said, his voice steady, despite the fear curling in his gut. "Long as I can." Before she could reply, a new sound cut through the dawn, a single horse's hooves, slow and deliberate. Approaching the homestead, Caleb's pulse raced. He grabbed his PA's old hunting knife from a shelf, its blade dull but heavy, and slipped outside. The frost glittered under the rising sun, and there, at the edge of the fence, stood a rider. He was tall, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, his wolfskin coat too fine for a settler. His horse, a scarred gray mare, snorted steam into the cold. The man's eyes black as Cole scanned the barn, as if he could see through its walls. "Caleb," Tala hissed from inside, her voice urgent. "Get back here." But Caleb stood his ground, the knife hidden behind his back. The rider dismounted, his boots crunching frost, and stepped closer. "You the Morrow boy?" he asked, his voice low, smooth as oil. "Heard you got something that don't belong here." Caleb's mouth went dry, but he squared his shoulders. "Ain't nothin' here but hay and horses," he said, his voice cracking but firm. "You lost the man Voss?" Caleb was sure-smiled, a cold, thin thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Not lost. Looking for a woman. Carries a pouch, red and white beads. Seen her." Caleb's heart pounded, but he held Voss's gaze. "Nobody like that here," he lied, his fingers tightening on the knife. The barn door creaked behind him, and he prayed. Tala stayed hidden. Voss tilted his head, his smile fading. "You're a bad liar, boy." He stepped closer, his hand resting on a pistol at his belt. "Tell her, I'm wattin'. She can't hide forever." Before Caleb could answer, a shout came from the house's PA's voice, sharp and angry. "Who's there?" Jed Morrow stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his eyes narrowing at the stranger. Voss raised his hands, his smile returning, but his eyes stayed cold. "Just passin' through," he called, mounting his horse. "I'll be back." As Voss rode off, his mare's hooves fading into the frost, Caleb's knees shook. He slipped back into the barn, where Tala stood, her face pale but resolute, the wolf charm clutched in her hand. "He's coomin' for me," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "And he won't stop." Can Caleb keep Tala hidden from Voss's deadly pursuit, or will the trader's shadow bring fire to the Morrow homestead? The Wyoming sun climbed slow, its light a pale shimmer across the frost-kissed prairie. But the air stayed heavy, as if the land itself sensed trouble brewing. Caleb Morrow hadn't closed his eyes since Voss's shadow retreated at dawn, the trader's cold smile and warning, "I'll be back," burning in his mind like a brand. Tala, hidden in the barn, was a secret too big for a boy of 15 to carry, but Caleb's heart refused to let her go. He slipped out of the house, his boots crunching through the thinning frost. A sack of dried apples, a tin of water, and his PA's old wool coat tucked under his arm. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered planks a fragile shield against the danger. Circling closer. Inside, Tala sat in the back stall, her buckskin dress patched with straw, the quilt draped loosely over her shoulders. Her dark braid framed a face, still gaunt but fierce, her brown eyes glinting with a fire that hadn't been there yesterday. The beaded pouch red and white, like a heartbeat in the dim light, rested in her lap, her fingers clutching the wolf charm inside. She looked up as Caleb entered, her gaze sharp but softened by trust. A bond forged in the frost. "You look scared," she said, her voice rough but steady, each word a step toward strength. "Ain't scared," Caleb lied, kneeling to set down the apples and water. He draped the wool coat over her, its gray folds heavy with the scent of smoke, and Cedar Voss came looking for you. Said you got something he wants. Tala's fingers tightened on the pouch, her eyes darkening. "He wants what he'll never have," she said, her voice low, like a growl. "My brother's ledger names, deals, men he worked with. Voss thinks I carry it. All I got is this." She held up the wolf charm, its carved lines catching the lantern's glow. "It's all that's left of my family." Caleb's chest ached. He thought of his ma, her gentle hands sewing patches, and his PA, gruff but steady, guarding their land. Tala had no one, just memories and a pouch of beads. "Why is he so sure you got it?" he asked, sitting on a feed crate, the barn's air thick with hay and tension. Tala's gaze drifted to the slatted walls, where slivers of sunlight danced. "My brother Cale worked for Voss, carried messages, traded furs. He wrote down names, places, things Voss didn't want known. When Cale refused to give it up, Voss burned our camp. I ran with this pouch, thinking it held the ledger. It don't. Just his wolf, my ma's hair, and a song she used to sing." Her voice broke, but her eyes stayed dry, fierce as a wolf's. "Voss don't believe me." Caleb's hands clenched, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to promise her safety, but the weight of Voss's threat pressed against him, heavy as the prairie's frost. "I'll keep you hidden," he said, his voice firm despite the fear curling in his gut. "My PA's got a rifle." "He'll know rifles," Tala cut in, her hand gripping his wrist, cold but strong. "Voss don't come alone. You bring guns, you bring fire. Your family don't deserve that." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. He thought of the ridge, the shadows he'd seen last night, their silent menace. "Then what do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tala leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "We wait. He'll come at dusk, always does. If I can talk to him, make him see I ain't got what he wants, maybe he'll leave." Her voice softened, almost pleading. "You gotta trust me, Caleb." He didn't want to trust her planet. Felt like waiting for a storm to break, but her eyes held him, steady and raw, and he nodded. "I'll stay close," he said, "no matter what." The day dragged on, the sun climbing higher, but offering no warmth. Caleb worked near the barn, chopping wood that didn't need chopping, his eyes darting to the ridge. By late afternoon, the air grew thick, the frost melting into mud. He slipped back into the barn, finding Tala standing, the quilt folded neatly, her buckskin dress brushed clean. "You're stronger," he said, surprised. "Not strong," she said, her lips twitching into a half-smile. "Just stubborn." She tucked the wolf charm into the pouch, her fingers lingering on the beads. "You remind me of Cale. He was stubborn, too." Before Caleb could reply, a shout split the air, his Poe's voice, sharp and urgent. "Caleb, get to the house." Caleb's heart lurched. He ran to the barn door, peering out. There, at the edge of the fence, stood Voss, his wolfskin coat glinting in the fading light, flanked by 3 men on horseback, their faces shadowed, rifles slung across their backs. Voss's black eyes locked on the barn, his smile cold as ice. "Caleb Morrow," Voss called, his voice smooth but venomous. "Bring her out, or we light this place up." Caleb's hands shook, but he stepped outside, the knife hidden in his belt. "Ain't nobody here but me," he shouted, his voice cracking but defiant. Inside, Tala whispered, "Stay strong, boy." Her hand brushed his, a fleeting touch that steadied him. Jed Morrow stormed from the house, rifle raised, his face red with fury. "Get off my land," he roared. Voss raised a hand, his smile unwavering. "We just want the woman, Morrow. She's got something of mine." Tala stepped forward, out of the barn's shadow, her braid swaying, her eyes blazing. "You got nothing to take, Voss," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the dusk. "I ain't your ledger." Voss's smile faded, his hand twitching toward his pistol. The air crackled, like the moment before lightning. Caleb's heart pounded, but he stood by Tala, his hand on the knife, ready to fight for the woman he'd chosen to save. Will Tala's defiance sway Voss, or will his wrath set the Morrow homestead ablaze? The Wyoming dusk settled over the prairie like a heavy quilt, its colors bleeding from gold to ash as the frost began to glitter again. Caleb Morrow stood by the barn, his heart hammering, the dull blade of his Poss hunting knife heavy in his belt. Tala's defiant words to Voss, "I ain't your ledger," still rang in his ears, bold but brittle, like ice about to crack. The trader's cold smile and the rifles of his men lingered in the air, a threat as real as the smoke curling from their distant campfire on the ridge. Caleb's PA, Jed Morrow, gripped his rifle on the porch, his face carved with fury, while his ma Lila watched from the doorway, her hands knotted in her apron. The homestead felt like a tinderbox, waiting for a spark. Inside the barn, Tala stood tall, her buckskin dress brushed clean, the quilt folded neatly on the straw. Her dark braids swayed, and her brown eyes burned with a fire that seemed to draw strength from the dusk itself. The beaded pouch, red and white, glinting like a fading hope, hung at her side, the wolf charm tucked inside. She met Caleb's gaze, her voice steady but urgent. "You should have stayed inside," she said, her words sharp but softened by concern. "This ain't your fight. It's mine now," Caleb said, his voice low but firm, his thin frame squared against the barn door. "I didn't pull you out of the snow to let Voss take you." Tala's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, but her eyes held a storm. "You're stubborn, Caleb Morrow. Like my brother." She stepped closer, her hand brushing the pouch. "Voss won't listen. He don't care about truth, only power. But I ain't running again." Caleb's chest tightened. He thought of his aunt's quilt, its patches sewn with love, and the stories she told of standing firm against hard times. "Then we face him," he said, his voice cracking but resolute. Together, before Tala could reply, the sound of hooves thundered closer, heavy and deliberate, shaking the frost from the ground. Caleb peered through a crack in the barn door. Voss and his 3 men rode up to the fence, their shadows long and jagged. In the dying light, Voss's wolfskin coat gleamed, his black eyes glinting like coal under his hat. "Morrow," he called, his voice smooth as poison. "Bring the woman out, or we burn this place to the ground." Jed stormed forward, rifle raised, his voice a growl. "You're on my land, Voss. Take your dogs and go." Voss laughed, a cold, hollow sound, and raised a hand. One of his men lit a torch, its flame licking the dusk. Caleb's stomach lurched. He turned to Tala, her face pale but unyielding, her hand gripping the pouch like a lifeline. "Stay here," he whispered, stepping outside before she could protest. "Leave her be," Caleb shouted, his voice breaking the tense air. He stood in front of the barn, the knife hidden behind his back, his heart pounding like a war drum. "She ain't got what you want." Voss's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "You're a fool, boy," he said, his hand resting on his pistol. "She's got a ledger names that'll bury men bigger than me. Hand her over, or your family pays." Tala stepped out, her braid swaying, her voice cutting through the dusk like a blade. "You're chassin', a ghost, Voss," she said, holding up the pouch. "This is all I got, my brother's charm, my ma's hair. No ledger, you burned it. With our camp." Voss's face twisted, his hand twitching toward his gun. "Liar," he spat. "You're hiding it, and I'll tear this place apart to find it." Before he could draw, Leela Morrow's voice rang out, sharp and steady. "Enough." She stepped off the porch, her apron fluttering, her eyes fierce. "You ain't burning nothin'. This is our home, and that girl's under our roof now." She stood beside Caleb, her hand on his shoulder, her gaze locked on Voss. Jed lowered his rifle slightly, stunned but standing firm. Tala glanced at Lila, her eyes wide with surprise, then back at Voss. "You want truth?" she said, her voice rising. "My brother died for your greed. I got nothing left but this." She opened the pouch, spilling its contents: a wolf charm, a lock of hair, a single bone bid onto the frost. "Take it or leave." "But you ain't talking me." The torchbearer hesitated, his flame flickering. Voss's men shifted, their rifles lowering slightly, uncertainty creeping into their faces. Voss's jaw clenched, his eyes darting from the pouch to Tala, then to Caleb and Lila. The air crackled, heavy with the weight of a choice. Caleb stepped closer to Tala, his hand on the knife, ready to fight for the woman he'd sworn to protect. "You're making a mistake," Voss said, his voice low, venomous. He mounted his horse, his men following, but his eyes never left Tala. "This ain't over." As they rode into the dusk, the torch's light faded, leaving only the frost and the pounding of hooves. Caleb exhaled, his knees weak. Tala sank to the ground, her hands shaking as she gathered the pouch's contents. Lila knelt beside her, her voice soft. "You're safe now, girl. You're with us." Tala's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something deeper, a flicker of hope. Fragile but alive. Jed stepped forward, his rifle lowered, his voice gruff but kind. "Get her inside," he said to Caleb. "She ain't facing this alone." As Caleb helped Tala to her feet, her hand brushed his, warm despite the cold. The barn stood silent, its shadows softened by the dusk, but the ridge beyond glowed faintly, as if more eyes were watching, waiting for what came next. Has Voss truly retreated, or will his shadow return to shatter the fragile peace of the Morrow homestead? The Wyoming prairie woke under a soft spring dawn, the frost replaced by a tender green that crept across the grass like a whispered promise. The air no longer bit but caressed, carrying the scent of wildflowers and thawing earth. Caleb Morrow stood on the porch of the homestead, his boots scuffed but steady, his thin frame a little taller now, as if the winter had stretched him toward manhood. Tala's defiance against Voss, and his ma's bold stand, "She's under our roof now," had shifted something in the Morrow household, like a door creaking open to let in light. The barn, once a hiding place, stood quiet, its weathered planks glowing in the morning sun. But the ridge beyond still held a shadow, a lingering question of whether Voss's threat had truly faded. Inside the house, Tala sat by the hearth, her buckskin dress replaced by a simple cotton blouse and dark skirt, borrowed from Leela's chest. Her dark braid was neat, adorned with a single red bead from her pouch, a quiet nod to her past. Her brown eyes, once clouded with pain, now gleamed with a cautious hope, like a wolf stepping into open ground. The beaded pouch rested on the table, its red and white patterns catching the firelight, the wolf charm beside it, a testament to her brother's memory. Lila stirred a pot of stew, her hands steady, while Jed whittled a piece of cedar. His gruff silence, softer now, as if Tala's presence had sanded down his edges. Caleb entered, his hands full of wildflowers he'd picked by the creek. "For you," he said, offering them to Tala, his cheeks flushing. "Thought they'd brighten the place." Tala took the flowers, her fingers brushing his, her lips curving into a rare, full smile. "You're too kind, Caleb Morrow," she said, her voice warm, no longer rough with pain. "Your ma's gonna think you're spoiling me." Lila laughed, a sound as rare as spring in Wyoming. "Let him spoil you, girl. This house could use some light." Jed grunted, but his eyes crinkled, a hint of a smile breaking through. The peace was fragile, though like a new bud in a late frost. Caleb couldn't forget Voss's parting words, "This ain't over," or the shadows that had watched from the ridge. He stepped outside, his gaze drifting to the horizon, where the ridge stood empty but heavy with memory. Tala followed, her skirt rustling, the wolf charm tucked into her hand. "You're worried," she said, standing beside him, her voice low but steady. "Ain't you?" Caleb asked, his eyes scanning the prairie. "Voss ain't the kind to walk away." Tala nodded, her gaze distant, as if seeing the burned camp of her past. "He's gone for now," she said. "But men like him, they carry grudges like knives. They'll come back, one day." She turned to him, her brown eyes fierce but soft. "You gave me a chance to stand, Caleb. I won't forget that." Before he could reply, a new sound broke the morning, a slow, steady clop of hooves, not threatening but deliberate. Caleb's hand went to his knife, but Tala's touch on his arm stopped him. A single rider approached, an older man with gray-streaked hair, his face lined like a riverbed, his buffalo hide cloak worn but proud. He dismounted at the fence, his eyes calm, carrying no weapon but a carved staff adorned with feathers. "I am Red Hawk," he said, his voice deep, resonant. "I come for Tala, of the Wolf Clan." Caleb's heart sank, but Tala stepped forward, her chin high. "I ain't, there's no more," she said, her voice clear. "They left me to die. This," she gestured to the homestead. "This is where I'm seen." Red Hawk's eyes softened, a flicker of pride breaking through his stoic gaze. "Your brother spoke of you," he said. "He said you'd find a home where the heart was true. We came not to take you, but to honor you." He pulled a small woven band from his cloak, its beads matching Tala's pouch. "For peace, between our people and this house." Tala took the band, her fingers trembling, and slipped it onto her wrist. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Red Hawk nodded, then turned to Caleb. "You, boy, you, lit a fire in the frost. That's a rare thing." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving only the echo of hooves and a new stillness. That evening, the Morrow house glowed with lamplight, its warmth spilling into the prairie. Tala helped Lila sew a new quilt, her stitches clumsy but earnest. While Caleb and Jed repaired a barn beam, their hammers ringing in rhythm. The ridge stood empty, the threat of Voss fading like a bad dream. But Caleb knew peace was a fragile thing, built on trust and time. As the fire crackled, Tala sang softly a song her mother taught her, about a wolf who found its pack under a new sky. Caleb listened, his heart full, knowing this homestead was no longer just a place, but a home. The prairie had taught him a lesson. Kindness, even in the coldest frost, could carve a path to belonging. And in that truth, there was power not just for Tala, but for anyone who dared to see another's heart. Will Tala's new home hold strong against the shadows of her past? Or will the prairie's whispers call her to a new journey? The story of Tala and Caleb reflects the real struggles of the American West in the 1870s, where settlers and native tribes often clashed over land and survival. Yet, acts of compassion, like Caleb's, bridge divides, showing that humanity can triumph over hardship. To learn more about this era, check out resources on Wyoming's history, or share your thoughts below. If this tale of courage and heart moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to join our prairie journey. Ring the bell for more stories of the Wild West, and tell us in the comments, what would you risk for a stranger? Share this video with friends who love Western romance, and follow us on